everyone, my name is Naina Rana. I'm an MSW student at Fordham University, and today I'll be talking to you about a client who I'm calling the powerful mother. This is a domestic violence story, and as you learn more about this case, you will understand why I've decided to call her the powerful mother. Domestic violence, of course, is an ongoing social problem here in the United States. Any domestic violence center will tell you that they get calls quite frequently at their center. Some statistics that are important to know, which I will briefly go over now, is that on a typical day, there are more than 20,000 phone calls placed to domestic violence centers nationwide. And intimate partner violence accounts for about 15% of violent crime here in the United States. And sadly, in domestic violence homicides, if there is a gun in the home, women are more likely to be killed by their abuser. These startling facts are just some of the reasons why it's important to really discuss this case and how, as a student clinical social worker, I could have maybe helped the client more, maybe developed the therapeutic relationship better, given her maybe more resources, or what are other ways I could have provided her any type of support. Oftentimes when you're working with these clients, especially if they are coming to the domestic violence center, it is of course voluntary, and they're coming when they have the most strength. The reason I am calling this the powerful mother is because the reason this client, and we're going to be calling her Christine C., is because she came to the center because she wanted to be a strength and support not only for herself but for her kids. And she takes the role of being a mother very seriously. So she knew that by coming to the center, she was not only helping herself, but she was helping her children and protecting her children. We will be going over various aspects of the case. We're going to be talking about a relevant history, presenting problems, client history, current history. We'll be going over sort of the theoretical framework that I went by in order to figure out the best way to help this client. I will also be going over a brief genogram that I created on the different relationships that she has with her family supports and supports outside of her family. We'll be going over current policies that affect this vulnerable population. We'll also be going over one of the sessions that I had with her and some of the techniques that I utilized in the session. I'll also be referring to some literature that I did research on in order to help understand this case better and how I could improve on it in the future. So just a quick overview on the Umbrella Center for Domestic Violence Services. The Umbrella Center for Domestic Violence Services is a service provided by the state of Connecticut. It is part of the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence. There are a whole bunch of domestic violence centers in the state of Connecticut. The Umbrella Center for Domestic Violence Services serves New Haven residents specifically. They provide one-on-one individual counseling, group counseling. They also have a legal aid available there as well. And then any other resources in terms of also finding shelter or housing if necessary. And you, of course, like I mentioned before, the powerful mother came to get the services of the Umbrella Center because she was experiencing emotional and psychological abuse from her abuser, who just so happens to be her husband. So just a quick overview of the client identification of Christine C. So Christine C. is white. She's 45 years old. She's a mother and a wife. She's trying to get a divorce from her husband. She's from a middle-class family, and she has two children, a 13-year-old son and a 4-year-old son. She says she is a former alcohol user and is currently in recovery. I have my doubts about that, only because I can't confirm that, because the Domestic Violence Center is a free service. What the client says is what we believe, and I think that goes with any client we work with. Obviously, we don't make a official diagnosis at the center because all the services are free. From the conversations I've had with the powerful mother, she indicates that she used to use, but there have been times when she has come in to the center where I'm make an educated guess that maybe she had been drinking the previous night. But I'm going to go by what she says, and say that she is a recovering alcoholic. I would also like to emphasize that she is living in the home with her husband currently. She's pursuing divorce, but because she doesn't have the financial means to live separately from her husband, she's still living in the home with him, even though he is psychologically and emotionally abusing her. According to the DSM, Christine C's diagnostic criteria indicates that she may be experiencing or have post-traumatic stress disorder, possible mild alcohol use disorder, possibly recovering from it, and I've also diagnosed her with caffeine withdrawal. When she stops drinking, it seems that she leans on caffeine quite a bit. And when she doesn't drink caffeine, she gets those migraines and other symptoms that usually happens when you get caffeine withdrawal. So from working with her, these are the diagnoses that I have come up with. So the presenting problem, like I've indicated, Christine C. came to the Umbrella Center for Domestic Violence Services because she was being emotionally and psychologically tortured by her husband. He manipulates the children sometimes in order to get her to do things that she may not like to do. They get into verbal arguments. He degrades her. He emotionally manipulates her. He tells her she's not good, she's not worthy, she's not smart. All the things that might happen in a domestic violence relationship. And I hate to call it a relationship because, of course, when you say relationship, you think positive relationship. And one of the things that I worked with Christine on is showing her the difference between a healthy relationship and an abusive relationship. And those are one of the things that we worked on in identifying what are the attributes, what are the things that are seen in a healthy relationship versus a unhealthy relationship. Christine also is navigating between the role of being a mother who protects her children, versus how do I promote self-care for myself. And self-care strategies is one of the things we are working on together. She also, along with one-on-one counseling at the Domestic Violence Center, she receives group counseling or domestic violence group counseling once a week at the center, where she has the opportunity to share her story, listen to other domestic violence survivors, and learn and interact with each other. And these seem to be positive things that she enjoys participating in. So relevant history to talk about here is Christine definitely had a positive childhood and had a normal developmental upbringing. One of the things that she mentions is that she has a positive relationship with her mother and father and her two younger brothers. The only relationship that she talks about that seems to be negative is with her stepfather in particular. She mentioned that she started drinking when her mom and stepfather got married, and then stopped drinking that when she got married, and then started drinking again when her husband started being psychologically and emotionally abusive. Um, she does mention that her relationship with her stepfather is one of discord. Um, he says mean things to her, doesn't really value her as a person or a human being, is what I'm gathering. Unfortunately, we weren't able to delve too much into that relationship, but it is something to think about and what that might indicate. She doesn't have a significant history of trauma during childhood. She does mention that going to church and spirituality was a big component of her childhood, but she did stop going when she got married. I guess her husband isn't very much a spiritual person, and she hasn't started going back since the abuse has started. And during our sessions, although we didn't delve too much into spirituality, we did conduct meditation and meditate different meditation type strategies, and she seemed to enjoy that very much. So, just relevant current information that's important to go over is Christine C. Hasn't worked at all when she was while she was married. Her husband told her, he would bring in the money. She should take care of the kids. So, although she has a degree in accounting, she hasn't worked for the past, I would say, 17 years since she's had children. Right now, I would say in the past month, she did go for a job interview. Quite nervous about it. Didn't think she was prepared. Part of it was because her husband, of course, says a lot of horrible, mean things that degrade her, and really lower her self-esteem. So, although she did receive it or get a job a month ago, she doesn't have any financial stability of her own, which means that, with domestic violence cases, separating from the abuser, it seems to make these survivors feel more better, more healthier emotionally, physically, and unfortunately she doesn't have the opportunity to do that right now because she doesn't have that financial stability. Um, there have been moments where if he has been if her husband, the abuser, has been emotionally or psychologically torturing her, she will lock herself in the guest bedroom where she currently stays, and that's the only way she can physically get away from him. And sadly, he will yell at her from the outside of the door in front of her kids, and yes, it's getting quite difficult for her. One of the reasons I diagnosed her with post-traumatic stress disorder, because she's directly experiencing traumatic events and reoccurring those events of psychological trauma and emotional trauma. So, she has nightmares sometimes. So far, none of anything she said has been physical abuse at all. But she has indicated that the verbal abuse has gotten so much that at times she wonders if he will, smack her or punch her or physically. But nothing has happened like that. And I will speak further into this, but my fear is that I hope due to the current coronavirus pandemic, I hope that won't be the case, that it will get to that. I also indicated in the beginning that she might have alcohol use disorder, and she seems to have 2 or 3 symptoms actively showing where, she's drank, she's attempted to stop. So I would say she's possibly in early remission, but I can't be too sure about that. I did see in one of her bags when she was coming in that there was like a Budweiser or something, but it wasn't open. So I don't. Again, we didn't have the opportunity to delve into that too much. So just quick client system formulation that I came up with. A lot of what Christine sees current problem stems from her abuser, right? So if there was a way to separate her and the abuser physically, then I believe she would be both emotionally and physically healthier. Her current obstacles are, of course, her abuser. She doesn't have any financial stability. She doesn't have any current active educational expertise besides having that accounting degree, like I mentioned. And outside of her family, she actually does not mention any social supports. She talks about having friends, but they're not very understanding of her situation and don't seem to be much help. Her main vulnerability is her abuser, and he can easily manipulate her by using their children. One of the literatures mentioned that when working with victims of intimate partner violence, which is what domestic violence is also called, clinicians might guide patients toward an increased awareness of how attachment issues have affected their relationship. So, how does attachment issues and attachment theories relate to this case? Was a question that you might have. And I believe even the threat of violence doesn't matter as long as the adult relationship provides some sort of security and sustenance. So, as I look back and reflect upon this case, I'm thinking, where is the sustenance or stability here? And one of the things that Christine mentions, and she mentions it quite often, is that the home that they live in is still her home. And it's something that, although she didn't put a financial investment in it, there is an emotional investment in the home that she lives in with her children, and she enjoys gardening, and she enjoys taking care of her home, and that is what she basically took care of for the past 17 years. So that security, in a sense, is some sort of security for her during this difficult time, even though she lives in that home that she calls her home with her abuser. Because at the end of the day, when he is not in the home and it's just her and her children, it is a safe place for her. And it is a place of warmth for her and her children. And she mentions this quite frequently, that, although she wants to have that financial stability and all of those things, she still will have a difficult time leaving that home. So some theories that I reflected upon to help me with this case was cognitive theory. And I utilized this in making the clinical formulation, and cognitive behavioral therapy was the intervention that I used because it helped the client address her maladaptive thoughts. Particularly, I reflected upon empowerment theory and feminist theory, and I utilized that in order to figure out how to develop a client's psychological self-efficacy. And the therapeutic relationship was built upon an empathetic understanding and on the client's situation, the powerful mother's situation, and continue to use a strength-based perspective and a trauma-informed approach, along with motivational interviewing techniques. So some of the ways I thought cognitive theory was important, and CBT techniques in particular were important, is because Often, the powerful mother, although she came to the clinic, to the domestic violence center on her own volition, and she was seeking to get help, there were various moments during speaking to her where she felt like she wasn't a good mother, where she had these negative thoughts, where she felt like maybe she wasn't doing enough to protect her children, because even when she was being verbally or emotionally abused, the her husband also said negative things about the children at times. So she felt like, what are the ways I could have protected my children more? And she did. She would say, let's not say that. He would tell the children, you're not good enough, or you didn't do that correctly, or why can't you do that better? Not a very motivating father or encouraging father whatsoever. And she tried her best to protect the children to the best of her ability, even if she was verbally or emotionally abused at the same time. Empowerment theory and feminist theory in particular, I looked at to analyze gender roles and power differences. I think, especially for Christine, throughout her marriage, she felt like, okay, it's my job as a mother, as a wife, to just take care of the children, and that's it. I don't have to think for myself. And those were some of the thoughts that she's had and sometimes continues to have. That seems to be changing as she continues a one-on-one counseling and domestic violence support group. We did a couple of different exercises where, in particular, we created this, what I called a power shield, where there was a drawing of a shield, and then in each part of the shield, she indicated strengths about herself. She talked about self-resiliency, being powerful, being strong. I think at one point she even mentioned, which I thought was brilliant, that she will hold her shield up physically, put an arm over herself almost when he says negative things, and remember that he's the negative person and she is the stronger, powerful, positive, empathetic person. And these are some of the attributes that she innately has. And it was quite brilliant and amazing to see that she was able to identify that she has these attributes, but that she sometimes forgets, and that she needs to remember in order to protect herself and her children. And that is, of course, why she is called the powerful mother. So specific goals that we continued to work on was that she was going to continue to attend domestic violence support group, one-on-one counseling, and work on specific self-care strategies. Some of the self-care strategies or self-care exercises that we talked about and we actually tried out in our sessions were aromatherapy, which actually was something that I looked into. I didn't know it would be as effective, but it did become quite effective. One of the aromatherapy, the different smells reminded her of positive memories in her childhood. We also spoke about briefly, I just did like a quick question to her and asked her what spirit animal does she remind, what reminds her, like what spirit animal she connects to, and she mentioned that she connects to a dolphin because they're free-spirited, outgoing, open, and she likes to be on the beach in front of the water, and so go walking with her dog. So she has had the opportunity to do that a couple times, and she liked that. She takes bubble baths. She didn't realize something as simple as an hour to herself makes her feel so much better and less angry and more positive, and I really have the strength and ability to even tolerate her abuser because they do share a home together. One of the goals that she also mentioned is because she has this new job now, she wants to save enough money to get an apartment of her own so that she has that physical separation between the abuser and herself. one of the literature references that really achieving economic independence may provide these women with more options of leaving an abusive relationship. So this economic and educational independence provides more strength for the powerful mother to leave this relationship. So as I mentioned, the interventions that I used, some cognitive behavioral tools that I used with the clients was journaling, breathing exercises, so, unraveling those cognitive distortions, and challenging negative thinking. So when she would say something like, maybe I'm not a good enough mother, maybe, I didn't do this, I would indicate to her, well, why are you thinking this way? You just mentioned that you do the best that you can to the best of your ability, and it seems like you are protecting your children, when they are being abused emotionally, or when he says something to you, walk away and you lock yourself in the room, and you are physically separating yourself from the situation to the best of your ability. And when I did mention these things to Christine, she acknowledged that, yeah, this is true. I am doing the best of my ability, the best I can do. And she understands her situation. She wasn't in denial. She knew that her husband was the abuser. She understood that he was psychologically abusing her and manipulating her. And that this is why she came to the Umbrella Center for these counseling services and take all the necessary next steps in order to stay positive and to help her children. The literature also references that group work is a very effective way of developing critical consciousness and increasing a sense of self-efficacy for this population. So they're able to identify others who have been in similar situations, and then they get a sense of empowerment from these other women that were in this domestic violence support group. Now, the domestic violence support group that I worked with was all women, but of course there are support groups for men as well. The powerful mother specifically enjoyed the mindfulness meditation, the aromatherapy, and then she indicated that she utilized this at home when she felt particularly stressed. One of the things that I reflected upon was specifically that in early life it looked like she didn't have any schemas of whatsoever, and it didn't put a hindrance to develop the therapeutic relationship. During domestic violence meetings, she was already setting up goals for herself to achieve. I was really there to support those goals and figure out the best ways to help her. So we definitely worked on self-care strategies. Was a really important part of her services. Sadly, the ending of treatment was quite abrupt. It happened, of course, due to this coronavirus epidemic. Before treatment ended, I sent a letter to the client and through the agency, and asked her if she ever needed any other additional self-care support or strategies, that I would be available. From a transference perspective to the client, I may be considered a additional support as a friend or someone who's knowledgeable in the domestic violence field. She indicated that I reminded of a young person who knows about this and is ready to help people. And she did remind me that she said I reminded her of her younger nieces. From my own counter-transference perspective, there were moments where I delved into some of the emotional conflicts regarding domestic violence and tried to be more available to my clients, all of my domestic violence clients, in the therapeutic process. If there were any emotional reaction that occurred, I was telling her story, and I used that as a way to help strengthen the conversation. So if there were moments where I felt sad or something, I reminded myself that this is her story that she's telling me, and I should help strengthen the inner strength that she already has. has. Those are just some of the aspects that I tried to utilize to strengthen the therapeutic alliance. And because it was just a free and honest conversation, the therapeutic alliance was quite strong from the beginning. Some policy issues, of course, I mentioned the isolation and financial stress has caused domestic violence calls to have an uptick during this coronavirus pandemic. In Connecticut, the current executive order is called the Stay Safe, Stay Home, which is, of course, self-isolation. And this has caused quite an uptick of domestic violence victims and survivors, calling into domestic violence hotlines. In an article I recently read, it stated that they are hearing from survivors how COVID-19 is already being used by their abusive partners to further control and abuse these domestic violence victims. COVID-19 is already impacting severely this population and their ability to access support and services like shelter, counseling, and different things that they would typically lean on communities for. And the population right now is not aware that some domestic violence services are available to this population, but they might not be aware of it because they think, you have to go to the center to get these services. Fortunately, it is available from the phone and other sort of services. So this is one of the policy issues that is occurring. Even though the policy for the coronavirus pandemic is to stay safe and stay home, the stay safe, stay home really doesn't apply to this population because staying home isn't always safe for this vulnerable population. So, just want to briefly conclude. The powerful mother. She is a powerful mother. It takes a lot of strength. It takes a lot of inner strength, especially a lot of self-resiliency, self-advocacy to get services for domestic violence. And, Christine is doing all the right things for herself and her family. She's getting the legal services that she needs. She's getting the support and collaboration she's working with. I know I recently spoke to the domestic violence center she's calling to get one-on-one counseling over the phone. She's doing in all the protective measures that she can do to stay safe in the home while she's with the abuser. She has an active safety plan that she has, and the local police are aware of her case. So a lot of different protocols are in place for her to stay safe. Unfortunately, as a student clinical social worker, I wish there was more I could do to help her out during this pandemic, but unfortunately, besides what I can do over the phone, there is not much I can do. And this population is already a vulnerable population, but more vulnerable at this time. I would like to thank everyone for giving me this opportunity to share my case, and I'm open and to hear suggestions and comments regarding the case. Thank you so much.